In this edition of Art Rocks, we'll hear poetry inspired by modern art.
After I viewed it and viewed these works, they stayed with me and they had a very strong impact on me and didn't feel resolved until I wrote about it.
See the world in 360 degrees.
A little planet is a way to view one location where everything is focused on that one location.
Gothic stained glass breaks into the 21st century.
I take those same techniques and I just use them in a way that I find interesting.
And a gang of artists come to one space to create art.
The hub is extremely important. It has brought all these artists together.
It's all ahead on this edition of Art Rocks.
Art Rocks is made possible by the Foundation for Excellence in Louisiana Public Broadcasting and by viewers like you.
Hello, I'm James Fox Smith, publisher of Country Roads magazine, and this is Art Rocks. Connecting with a piece of art is a personal experience, a conversation on many different levels between you, the artwork, and the artist. Imagine if you tried to put down in words those feelings and thoughts. That's just what writer Ed Ruzicka has done in his recently published book of poetry, Engines of Belief, Engagement with Modern Art. Each of his poems corresponds with a work of art. Ruzicka gave us some insight into the book and shared a sample of his work.
Adam was a stern, monocled man who relentlessly studied how Parisians translated light into joy. He stood in a tailored suit to daub lemon into rising swells and never dreamed what threats to Victorian triumph his son might witness. He couldn't imagine that in 20 years this boy who quietly whined beside the Pacific would burst into flames on the German front. It didn't matter that the children craved breakfast. Cold wind meant nothing to this artist when he could milk an essence out of the sea, then make a moment stand outside of time on a gallery wall where dawn's conch would unfurl, turquoise, mauve, and mother of pearl, beneath a feathered gold forever. This is completely poems that are about modern art or modern artists. I was lucky enough to live near the Chicago Art Institute. I visited it when I lived there, and every time I get near Chicago, I go there. So works from the Art Institute are featured quite often in here, as well as a few by contemporary artists who are locally known, like Ed Ruzicka, whose work is on the cover. Night Walk in Clara's Room is the piece which is on the cover of the book and which I chose to write about. I chose to write about it because after I viewed it and viewed these works, they stayed with me and they had a very strong impact on me and didn't feel resolved until I wrote about it. This is the book title poem, and this is dedicated to Franz Marc's The Large Blue Horses. In The Large Blue Horses, not only are they these stunning blue creatures, but there are great tusks rising up through the landscape, and this lets you know that we're talking about a phantasmal world, not about ordinary horses. Engines of Belief. Muscle bunched, haunches shift amidst the flames of sunset mountains. Phantasmal creatures. You will not see these steeds in any desert canyon, stamping, snorting dust into tempests. You will not find these Empyrean steeds breathing in any fog-draped Appalachian dawn. These are the engines of belief. These chargers rear and strike the way the sea tosses off gravity when tsunami rise and smite. If I could walk among them, among these splendid blue stallions whose flame is freedom, if I could wrestle up onto one of their backs, set my jaw above the cords of its neck, dig heels into its great ribs, that would be to spur the imagination toward the moment when stars and quarks got born. I believe that poetry is the great gift to mankind, and that while the artist is tied to one particular time, maybe a few images, but tied very clearly to the visual world in one time, I can be 5 minutes before, I can speak about what impelled that character from their birth or toward their death. I can step into the inner world and then into the larger world and back and forth and weave a tale in a complex nature about what it means to be human and to have an imagination. This tempest that trembles up with epileptic force through shimmering fields of light is what the blind see more of by seeing only darkness. It is what we are reminded of in spite of ourselves during the first quiet hours on the towel by the seaside as ceaseless waves work to pull the shore apart. Or what we pay good dollar for when lights go black in the womb of a movie theater and an Armageddon of terror rages across the screen. When passing near a sputtering madman, we veer away as he raises the book and exhorts us to come to grips with what is inevitable. That someday the once rooted stars will tremble within the roar of a long-forgotten voice and drop like teeth. Here, in this late shower of light, Van Gogh has transfixed our attention so that we cannot turn, but are caught up and quite fulfilled in this rapturous end.
For more, visit edrpoet.com. Now, let's take a look at some of the arts and cultural events coming up soon in Louisiana. For more information on these events, visit the website at lpb.org/artrocks. And you can find more arts connections at countryroadsmag.com. Everything may be bigger in Texas, but for Houston-based photographer Syd Moen, who specializes in wide-angle photography, it's all about making the world into little planets.
My name is Syd Moen, and I'm a Houston photographer. I saw a little planet about 4 years ago on the internet, and I thought, I can do that. And I found it very interesting. I've always been intrigued with the spatial aspect of spherical photography. VR photography is virtual reality photography. So if you've ever gone to Google Maps and looked at a street view and where you can pan around and see 360 degrees around that block, that's VR photography. A stereographic projection is a mapping term, and that's how a 3D sphere is mapped 2D. But you see a globe, you know, the Earth, that you can kind of turn. Okay, that's a 3D thing. But you can also see maps of the world that are 2D, and that would be a stereographic projection. I take 30 photographs. So I take a picture, picture, picture. So it's 360 degrees all the way around. And I get all the sky and all the ground. Then I take it into the computer and I stitch the image together. There are a lot of seams, so there's a bit of time in that. And then I use mapping software to help me get the little planet view. A 360-degree panorama is a spherical image, and you can see the 3D aspect on a computer, but a little planet is the same image, only it's mapped 2D. That's the way you see the whole image around you. What I like about little planets, it's not like a traditional panorama where you're kind of looking like this. It's all in front of you, and I think that's what attracts me to it. And it's different. I like that it's different. It's a little surrealistic, and I like that. And I'm always surprised at people who can say, oh, I know that. I mean, it's like I said, well, you get an A+ because you named all the locations, because sometimes I think some of them are a little obscure. I think what first attracts people is whether it's an iconic image, let's say like the River Oaks Theater, which everybody loves that one. And I want you to look at that, and I just want to attract you to my art first. And usually that's what it is. It'll be some iconic image that people know or resonates with them. But once they get into it, then they start kind of looking around, and you'll see people kind of turning their head, because they're kind of looking around, and they're going, oh, there's that shop there, or, there's that. So you do kind of connect to a place, even though it may not be the big fancy place. It's the little place that you see. Well, my favorite one is the shrimp boats. It was taken down in Galveston, where the shrimp boats come in. I can't get the view now because there's a building, but it was a spectacular sky, and I love being down by the water, and I think, working people are interesting too. Little planets. It's kind of the idea that the world revolves around me, and a little planet is a way to view one location where everything is focused on that one location. And you can see all around it, but maybe you're focusing a little bit more on one part. And it's just kind of a celebration of place.
To learn more, visit sydmoen.com. In our next segment, we travel to Milwaukee, Wisconsin to sit down with artist Melissa Janda. The tradition of stained glass may span the centuries, but Janda's work is very much a product of our time.
I really am attracted to detail, so line work and shading and pure color are what really inspires me with glass art. My name is Melissa Janda, and I am a stained glass artist. I always was drawing as a child, so I've always been interested in art. It's been 20 years since I left art school, and I've been doing it ever since. Typically when people think of painted glass, that's generally what they think of, all the church windows that you see. And so I really try to incorporate, I take those same techniques and I just use them in a way that I find interesting. Stained glass can be a difficult medium. There's a lot of different things about it that that really take a lot of practice. Every step along the way is another part of the craft. It's really a medium like no other because of the light, because it requires light to pass through it in order to view it. And you can change it in so many different ways, with paint, with color, with texture, with density of glass. One piece can look different at 8 different times of the day or season, and I am eternally fascinated by that, by the light. The difference between traditional stained glass and what I do as an artist is, that's hard to say because it's really steeped in tradition, which is one of the things that I like about it. The painting on glass is another form of expression, and what I do can be the same techniques, but a more modern interpretation. You're relying on the light to pass through it, and so you have to be constantly aware of how that's going to change things. You can't just keep applying things and changing things like you would with oil paints. And also, you're relying on firing it. You have to fire it in a kiln to get the paint to be a permanent surface of the glass, and so you're building up layers of values and texture. When you're painting something, knowing not just how it looks in front of you now, but how that's going to translate into the actual window. So you kind of have to account for that. I guess I would compare it more to like a watercolor or even printmaking. It can be a very different process than typical canvas painting. The piece I'm currently working on now is a commission for a residence. They have an older house, but they are also interested in more modern design. So that makes it kind of interesting because I also like that too, the tradition and the modern kind of all together. They chose animals as their subject matter. And so there's 3 kids and the parents, and they all chose their own animal that they felt reflected them the most. And it's going to go in 2 side panels that go alongside some French doors in their house. Here we have a scaled version of the design. This is the set of doors and then the 2 side panels. I start by doing sketches. They're generally a scaled down version. It'll be exact proportions of the space, but the small scale version. Get the design worked out, and then after the sketches are done in color, then I'll do a full-size drawing. And I need to have that if there's artwork in the painting, then I work out everything full size, and then I can also transfer that into patterns for cutting the glass. Once I have patterns, the pattern shows me the shape that the piece of glass has to be and also the color of the glass. And I cut the glass around the pattern. And once that's all finished, then I paint the glass and fire the glass into a kiln. And then once the whole painting process is finished, then I fabricate the window. I use the same drawing, I transfer that drawing onto another layer of paper that I can use to form the glass around the lead. Well, leading the window can be complicated depending on the design, and that basically involves taking a lead channel and forming it around the glass and cutting it to fit. Then all the joints have to be soldered together. That holds the whole window together. And then once that happens, there's also a puttying process where you take a glazing compound and you press it in between so it encloses all of the spaces between the glass and the lead, and it takes away all those little reflections that you might get. And then basically the window is complete. It can take a pretty long time to do it all from beginning to end. Of course, it depends on how large the windows are or how many pieces there are. It's definitely a long process. There's still always that wow factor of seeing it really come to life. Some of my favorite pieces are just the really little things that I do that are almost like sketches. I really like to do figure drawings. Sometimes I'll just take old figure drawings out of my sketchbooks and I'll use them and just incorporate them into glass, and sometimes just those little pieces bring me a lot of happiness. Sometimes even as much as the large production pieces. Glass really changes a space a lot, as a lot of art does, and so it's kind of nice being in the business of enhancing spaces, because most people are always happy when you make something look good, and I really hope that other people see that as well.
For more information, visit sadlergallery.net. Now, let's take a look at another of Louisiana's treasures. Each week on Art Rocks, we celebrate and explore an element with unique ties to Louisiana. This week, we're visiting Briarwood and examining the legacy of Caroline Dorman.
Tucked away in the uppermost tip of Natchitoches Parish, among the piney woods, is a wild garden, a gift from an extraordinary woman to the public. Briarwood, also known as the Caroline Dorman Nature Preserve, is 154 acres of forested property near the town of Saline. The former home of Caroline Dorman, Briarwood is less of a garden than a wildwood and repository of native plants that Dorman collected and studied throughout her life as a pioneering environmentalist. Miss Carey, as she was called by friends, was a bit of a Renaissance woman, an artist, writer, teacher, forester, horticulturist, botanist, historian, archaeologist, and a tireless conservationist. Her 10-year single-handed campaign for the federal purchase of lands to create the Kisatchie National Forest was realized in 1930, and the once cleared land was replanted and has become a thriving forest once again. Dorman also advocated for state parks and advanced the idea of a state arboretum. At Briarwood is the one-room retreat, the writer's cabin, where in the 1920s Dorman began writing and illustrating her 5 books, primarily on the subjects of native plants and birds. The modest log cabin built in 1950, where she and her sister lived, now serves as a museum. The most complete botanical and wildlife sanctuary in Louisiana, Briarwood contains a wetland area where Dorman propagated Louisiana irises, a cypress bog and ponds, southern trees and shrubs, and nearly 600 varieties of native wildflowers. Briarwood is open to the public weekends March through May, when the spring blooms, such as the wild azaleas, are in their glory, August for the orchids and the rare plum-leafed azaleas, and November for the changing colors of fall. It's worth the trip to experience elements of our natural heritage, the rare and beautiful things that Caroline Dorman wanted so passionately to share and to preserve for future generations.
In our last segment, we're traveling down to New Smyrna Beach, Florida, to visit the Hub on Canal. That's where more than 80 local artists convene to cultivate their craft, to learn from one another, and to share their insight with curious visitors. See how much of the nature of this unique space allows for artistic exchange on a remarkable scale.
There's something about when you walk in that door and somehow the curving floor and curving hallway leads them in and they get to see these cubicles full of art.
It's just like nothing else. Once you walk in that door at the Hub, it's like you're in another whole place. And there are over 80 artists in this building.
It's a unique spot. You check your ego at the door and you come in and here's everything that you would imagine in art. And it's local art. We haven't brought it in from everywhere around the world. This is our local people. This is us.
Painting for me is just, it's breathing. I have to do it. I love to do it. I also do assemblages and sculpture. So I do several other mediums, but basically I came here as a painter.
I was a geologist for Texaco, and I decided that I wanted to retire early and that I wanted to do something with my life after I retired, and I didn't want to be a geologist. So I saw some birds at a gallery on Hilton Head, and I told my wife, that's what I'm going to do. You learn to, instead of looking, you end up seeing. And then can you translate that to something? You basically end up being an impressionist. You're a philosopher. You're placing what you see and what you conceive to, like me, to a piece of work.
I think we all are learning from each other.
Talking with different artists and how they approach their art, which might be very different from me.
It definitely has inspired me to go in different directions. I have gone from being a somewhat realistic artist to doing very traditional watercolors, and I definitely have been influenced by some of the abstract artists here and have gotten into doing abstract, which I absolutely love. And I teach a class where we work on all different surfaces. This is roofing paper. I'm going to go in with a spreader. Most of my students are female and they range in age from 30 to probably 75. They tend to come in looking and then they ask about classes, and they'll do the same with Bo.
They bring a lot to the place as well because they're coming from different areas of life experiences and they see things a little bit differently than I do.
People want to be part of a community. Not only do those people out on the street want to be part of us, we want to be part of them.
I do enjoy teaching and seeing the changes in a student as they progress from real basic drawing into very elaborate paintings.
I have my studio here and I like to come in because I like to be with the people that come in, the people that are here, the visitors, the artists that are here.
It really brings a lot of people and introduces them to art, and they see actually artists working, and it gives them and us a one-on-one with the public.
The hub is extremely important. It has brought all these artists together, and not just fine artists, but musicians and poets and writers and just all the different very creative artists here, and then the visitors are equally as creative frequently.
Together we're a force. Alone we're just an artist, but together we're the hub.
That's it for this edition of Art Rocks. Don't forget, you can visit us anytime on your computer. Our address is lpb.org/artrocks. Catch up on any episodes you've missed and find out details on upcoming arts events throughout Louisiana. So until next time, I'm James Fox Smith, and thanks for watching.